My parents called me the dumb one while my sister got a full ride to Harvard. On her graduation day, my father announced she would inherit everything, including a new Tesla and a $3 million mansion. I sat quietly in the back until a stranger handed me an envelope and whispered that it was time to show them who I really was. My name is Gemma. I am 33 years old, and for the last decade my family has treated me like a worthless charity case. Before I dive into exactly how a $68 million check shattered their entire reality, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been entirely underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you. The clinking of crystal glasses rang through the grand ballroom of Boston's most exclusive country club. I was seated at the very back, tucked away near the swinging kitchen doors, practically hidden from view. Up on the brightly lit stage stood my father, Jonathan. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive silk tie as he commanded the attention of 200 wealthy guests. Beside him stood my mother, Catherine, wearing a forced pageant smile and draped in jewelry she had bought on credit just to impress people she secretly despised. And right in the center of their proud affection was my 27-year-old sister, Courtney. She had just graduated from Harvard Law School, and my parents were determined to turn her achievement into a spectacle of our family's supposed superiority. My father leaned into the microphone. "Today, we are not just celebrating a graduation," he announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We are celebrating the absolute brilliance of the next generation. Courtney has always been the pride of this family, possessing an intellect and drive that sets her apart from the rest. We believe in rewarding success, and to honor her flawless future, your mother and I have two gifts." He snapped his fingers, and a valet drove a brand new Model S Tesla right up to the ballroom's glass terrace doors. The crowd gasped and applauded, but my father raised his hand to quiet them. "That is just for her daily commute," he laughed smoothly. "For her real future, we are formally transferring the deed to our $3 million family mansion into Courtney's name. She deserves nothing but the absolute best." The room erupted into cheers. I kept my face perfectly blank, staring down at my water glass. That was when my Aunt Beatrice slid into the empty chair next to me. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the simple, off-the-rack black dress I had worn. "It really is a shame you did not inherit the family brains," Gemma Beatrice said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Are you still doing that little computer repair job installing software for minimum wage?" "I am in cybersecurity, Aunt Beatrice," I replied evenly. She waved her hand dismissively. "Right, fixing Wi-Fi routers. It is just so heartbreaking for your parents to see Courtney achieving such greatness while you struggled so much. If only you had figured out a way to stay in college instead of dropping out. I suppose quitting is just what happens when someone lacks ambition." I gripped my napkin under the table. Dropping out had not been a choice. When I was 20 years old, I had begged my parents on my knees to co-sign a tiny $2,000 student loan so I could finish my semester. My father had looked me dead in the eye and refused, claiming I was a bad investment. The very next day, I watched my mother drop $10,000 on a designer wardrobe for Courtney's freshman year. I was forced to pack my bags, abandon my degree, and sleep on a friend's couch while working 3 minimum wage shifts just to eat. The applause died down, and Courtney stepped off the stage, walking through the crowd like royalty. She made a direct line for my dark corner. In her hand, she held a brimming glass of red wine. As she approached my table, she did not even pretend to trip. She simply tilted her wrist, sending a splash of dark crimson liquid straight down the front of my dress. "Oops!" she said, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. My hand slipped. "Such a shame about your dress, though. I suppose you can just buy another one at the thrift store." I stood up slowly, the cold wine soaking through the fabric. "You did that on purpose, Courtney." She stepped closer, dropping the sweet facade, her voice turning vicious and low. "You are an embarrassment to this family, Gemma. You look like a maid sitting back here. Since you clearly could not afford to buy me a graduation gift with your pathetic help desk salary, you can make yourself useful for once. Grab a towel and help the waitstaff clear the plates tonight." It is the only way you will ever earn your keep in this room. I glanced toward the stage and saw my mother watching us. Instead of intervening, Catherine simply smirked and turned away, silently validating Courtney's cruelty. I grabbed my purse, preparing to walk out of that toxic room forever. But before I could take a single step toward the exit, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. A man in a sharply tailored charcoal suit strode in, completely ignoring the country club's strict guest list protocol. It was Harrison Cole, one of the most ruthless and respected mergers and acquisitions lawyers in the tech industry. He walked straight past the millionaires, past my gaping sister, and stopped right in front of me. He did not look at anyone else. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick wax-sealed envelope bearing the logo of J.P. Morgan Chase. He placed it firmly into my hand and leaned in his voice, carrying just enough for Courtney to hear. "The funds have officially transferred to your private account," Miss Gemma Harrison said smoothly. $68 million in pure cash. I believe it is time to show these people who you really are. Harrison Cole stood perfectly still, his presence commanding the space around us. The heavy wax-sealed envelope rested securely in my palm. The words, $68 million, echoed in my mind like a distant thunderclap. Courtney was staring at Harrison, her jaw slightly unhinged, unable to comprehend why a man wearing a bespoke suit and a Patek Philippe watch was bowing his head to her messy wine-stained sister. Before the reality of the moment could fully register, a sharp, punishing grip clamped down on my bicep. It was my mother. Catherine's perfectly manicured fingernails dug into my skin like eagle talons. She did not ask about the stranger. She did not ask what was inside the thick envelope. In her self-absorbed universe, nothing related to my life could possibly hold any actual value. She yanked me backward with surprising force. I was dragged away from the glittering lights of the ballroom, away from Harrison, and pushed through a set of heavy wooden doors that led into a secluded service hallway. The vibrant music and the chatter of the wealthy guests instantly became a muffled, distant hum. The air back here was cold, smelling of industrial cleaning supplies, a stark contrast to the expensive floral arrangements out front. Catherine dropped her camera-ready pageant smile instantly. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement. There was no motherly warmth in her eyes, only the cold, calculating glare of a woman assessing a financial asset. "I do not know what kind of pathetic stunt you are trying to pull out there with that delivery boy," my mother hissed aggressively, adjusting her designer shawl. "But we have serious family business to discuss right now, and you are going to listen to every single word I say." I stood perfectly straight, smoothing down the ruined fabric of my dress. I remained silent, letting her dig her own grave. "Your father and I just closed the deal on that $3 million mansion for Courtney," Catherine said, her voice dropping into a demanding, authoritative register. "We had to liquidate a massive portion of our available cash to ensure she starts her new life with the exact level of prestige she deserves. She is a Harvard graduate now. She is opening her own law firm next month, and she requires immediate operating capital." She took a step closer, crowding my personal space, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me, just as she had done when I was a terrified teenager. "I know you have $40,000 sitting in a savings account," Catherine demanded, her eyes narrowing. I felt a cold laugh building in my chest. She knew that exact number because during a weak moment a year ago, I had tried to prove to her that I was not a complete failure. I had proudly mentioned my emergency fund. She had not congratulated me then. She had simply filed that number away in her mind, waiting for the perfect moment to plunder it. She fully believed that those $40,000 were my entire life savings, the sum total of my existence. "You are going to go to your bank first thing tomorrow morning," Catherine ordered, pointing a finger at my chest. "You will withdraw that $40,000 and wire it directly into Courtney's business account. Do not try to argue with me." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. My fingers lightly traced the edge of the J.P. Morgan envelope in my hand. Inside this thin paper rested a fortune that could buy and sell her entire social circle without making a dent. Yet here she stood, violently demanding the meager safety net she thought I had scraped together over a decade of hard work. She fully intended to strip me of every last penny, leaving me destitute, just to fund my sister's vanity project. You are her older sister, Catherine continued, mistaking my stunned silence for submission. It is your absolute duty to sacrifice for this family. What do you even need that kind of money for anyway? You are single. You live in a tiny rented apartment. You do a nowhere job fixing computers. Courtney is the ultimate future of this family. She carries our legacy. You are going to help her achieve greatness, and in return, your father and I might allow you to sit at the main table during Thanksgiving this year. I looked down at the dark red wine stain bleeding across my dress. I thought about the nights I went hungry, shivering in a freezing apartment because they refused to help me with a $2,000 student loan. I thought about the years of brutal isolation, the constant comparisons, and the way they treated me like a stray dog they were legally forced to acknowledge. No, I said. Just one word. It was calm, steady, and absolute. My mother blinked, her heavily mascaraed eyelashes fluttering in genuine shock. In our toxic family dynamic, I was always supposed to cower. I was supposed to beg for their approval and empty my pockets for a crumb of their affection. Excuse me, she snapped, her voice pitching upward in disbelief. I said no. Mother, I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. I am not giving Courtney a single cent of my money. You and Dad chose to drain your accounts to buy a $3 million mansion you clearly cannot afford, just to look wealthy in front of your country club friends. That is your self-inflicted financial disaster, not mine. If Courtney needs capital for her law firm, she can walk into a bank and apply for a commercial loan like a normal adult. Catherine stepped forward, her face turning an ugly, blotchy shade of red. The veins in her neck strained against her heavy diamond necklace. The polished illusion of the sophisticated matriarch completely vanished, replaced by the vicious, ruthless woman she truly was beneath the designer clothes. You ungrateful, selfish little brat, she spat, her voice vibrating with pure malice. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. And this is exactly how you repay us. By hoarding your pathetic little savings while your own sister builds a real legacy. She raised her hand as if she wanted to strike me, but something in my unwavering gaze made her stop, her fists clenched at her sides. You are completely cold-blooded. Catherine snarled, her words dripping with absolute hatred. You have no heart. You are the ultimate scum of this family. I should have left you at an orphanage the day I realized how useless and stupid you were going to be. Do not ever ask us for anything again. You are dead to me. She spun around on her expensive heels, marching back toward the ballroom doors, fully believing she had just crushed my spirit. She had no idea that her cruel words were the final nail in her own coffin. The tense standoff in the service hallway was no longer private. The heavy wooden doors had drifted open, and a few curious faces from the ballroom began to peer through the gap. The music still played a cheerful jazz tune that felt grotesquely out of place against the venom radiating from my mother. Murmurs started to ripple among the closer tables. People love a spectacle, especially when it involves the supposedly perfect family showing cracks in their flawless veneer. Catherine noticed the audience. I watched her posture stiffen as she tried to hastily reassemble her mask of elegant superiority. She lowered her voice to a harsh, desperate whisper, attempting to contain the damage while still exerting her control. Keep your voice down, Catherine hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the onlookers. You are making a scene, Gemma. You are embarrassing your sister on her special night. This is exactly why we rarely invite you to these events. You have no class. You have no understanding of how families support each other. You just take and complain when you are asked to finally contribute. I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. The anger I had buried for 13 years, the humiliation I had swallowed every single time they dismissed me, finally broke through the surface. I didn't care who was watching. I didn't care about their country club reputation. Contribute? I repeated, my voice steady and carrying clearly down the hall. Let's talk about contributions, Mother. Let's talk about family support. Do you remember the night I turned 20? Catherine's eyes narrowed, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. I don't know what ancient history you are trying to drag up now, but this is about Courtney's future. I remember it perfectly, I said, refusing to let her deflect. I was standing in the kitchen of our old house, I had exactly 3 days to pay my tuition for the spring semester, or I would be dropped from my computer science program. I had saved every penny from my campus job, but I was exactly $2,000 short. Just $2,000. I brought the student loan paperwork to you and Dad. I just needed a cosigner. I wasn't even asking you for the money. I just needed a signature so I could finish my degree. I paused, letting the memory hang in the air between us. The onlookers at the door had gone completely silent, listening intently. I begged you. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I literally got down on my knees and begged you to sign that paper. I promised I would pay every cent back the moment I graduated. And what did Dad say? He looked at me over the top of his newspaper and said I was a bad investment. He said there was no point in throwing good credit after a mediocre student. Catherine lifted her chin defiantly. We were going through a difficult financial transition that year. We had to prioritize. Prioritize. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. That is a fascinating word for it, because the very next afternoon, less than 24 hours after you watched me pack my bags and abandon my education, I saw the caterers arriving. You didn't have $2,000 to co-sign a loan for my future, but you somehow found $25,000 in cash to throw Courtney a lavish Great Gatsby-themed birthday party at a rented estate. You paid for ice sculptures, Mother. You bought a champagne tower while I was putting my belongings into garbage bags because I had nowhere to live. A gasp rippled from the doorway. Catherine's face drained of color, then flushed a furious mottled red. The carefully constructed narrative of the supportive, loving parents was disintegrating right in front of her social circle. She opened her mouth to argue, to spin another lie, but a heavy hand slammed against the service door, pushing it wide open. My father, Jonathan, stood there, his face contorted with rage. He had evidently been alerted by the whispers and had come to silence the disturbance. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a threat to his carefully curated empire of lies. That is enough, Jonathan roared, his voice booming down the hallway. You ungrateful, lying little wretch! How dare you stand here and spew this garbage in front of our guests? I met his furious glare without flinching. Is it garbage if it is the absolute truth, Dad? Or is the truth just inconvenient for the image you are trying to sell tonight? He marched forward, his imposing figure meant to intimidate me into submission. He stopped inches from my face, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. You are a failure, Gemma. He spat the words meant to cut deep. You have always been a failure. You were too lazy to figure out your own education, and now you stand here blaming us for your mediocre life. You are a useless, pathetic freeloader. This family does not tolerate parasites. We only support winners. Courtney is a winner. You are nothing. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at my face. You are going to transfer that $40,000 to your sister by tomorrow morning, or I swear to God I will make you regret you were ever born. I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear that used to paralyze me in his presence was entirely gone. I was no longer the desperate 20-year-old begging for scraps of his approval. And how exactly are you going to do that? I asked quietly. Jonathan scoffed, a cruel, arrogant smirk twisting his lips. You think because you fix computers in a basement somewhere that you are safe from me. I am Jonathan Vance. I run one of the largest investment funds in Boston. I sit on the boards of half the tech companies in this city. If you defy me tonight, I will make one phone call tomorrow morning, and you will be blacklisted from every single IT job in the state. I will crush your pathetic little career before lunchtime. You will not even be able to get a job wiping down keyboards. I will ruin you. The silence that followed his threat was absolute. The wealthy guests lingering near the service doors held their collective breath. They were waiting for me to shatter. They were waiting for the prodigal failure of the family to finally burst into tears and beg for mercy. That was the exact script my parents had written for me. That was the pathetic role I had been forced to play for 2 decades. Jonathan stepped even closer, his chest puffed out like a tyrant who had just crushed a minor rebellion. He pointed a thick, manicured finger at the cold, tiled floor between us. His eyes were wide with a manic, desperate need for control. You are going to fix this disaster right now. Jonathan commanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly tone meant to inspire sheer terror. You are going to get down on your knees and apologize to your sister for trying to ruin her graduation night. Then you are going to apologize to your mother for your gross disrespect. And tomorrow morning you will wire that $40,000 directly into Courtney's account. He leaned in the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the metallic smell of the service hallway. If you do exactly as I say, I might let you keep your miserable little job, Jonathan sneered. If you refuse, I will personally ensure you never work in this city again. I will make you a ghost in the corporate world. Courtney pushed her way through the heavy wooden doors, stepping into the hallway to join her protectors. She crossed her arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. She had her brand new Harvard law degree. She had her shiny new car. She had her $3 million mansion deed waiting for her. Yet she still needed to see me humiliated to feel truly victorious. You really are pathetic, Gemma, Courtney said, her voice dripping with spoiled entitlement. Mom and Dad give you a chance to finally be useful to this family, and you throw a massive tantrum. Just apologize and give me the money. I need it for my firm's marketing budget. You don't even have a real career, so it is not like you need a savings account. Stop being so incredibly selfish. Catherine moved to stand beside her golden child, placing a protective maternal hand on Courtney's shoulder. She nodded in fierce agreement with my father's insane ultimatum. Listen to your father, Catherine warned, her tone shifting to fake maternal concern for the benefit of the eavesdropping guests. We are giving you one last chance to be a part of this family. Get on your knees, Gemma. Show some humility. Show us that you understand your place. Their words hit me, but they did not leave a bruise. Years ago, this exact scenario would have sent me into a violent spiral of panic attacks. I would have cried uncontrollably. I would have apologized for breathing the same air as them. I would have handed over my last dollar just to make the screaming stop and to earn a fleeting crumb of their affection. But I was no longer the frightened 20-year-old girl they had thrown out into the freezing winter night. I was a 33-year-old woman who had built a digital empire from the ground up. I looked down at the dark wine stains soaking into my dress. The fabric was ruined, clinging uncomfortably to my skin, a physical reminder of their endless cruelty. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, and calmly began to dab at the spilled wine. I did not rush. I did not tremble. My hands were perfectly steady. The sheer indifference of my actions seemed to infuriate my father even more. The veins in his forehead throbbed visibly. He was used to people cowering when he raised his voice. He was used to his wealth and status acting as an impenetrable shield against any form of defiance. Did you hear me? Jonathan barked, taking another aggressive step forward, as if he might physically force me to the ground. I said, get on your knees. I finished wiping the excess wine from my dress. I folded the handkerchief with deliberate precision and placed it back into my clutch. I adjusted my posture, standing at my full height. Then I slowly raised my head and locked eyes with the man who had abandoned me for the sake of his own bloated ego. There were no tears in my eyes. There was no fear trembling in my jaw. There was only absolute icy clarity. I looked at Jonathan, Catherine, and Courtney, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt nothing but profound pity for their blinding ignorance. You want to force me to my knees, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that made the onlookers in the doorway freeze in their tracks. You want to threaten my livelihood and treat me like a peasant. You really believe that your country club memberships and your loud voices give you the ultimate power to destroy me. Jonathan scoffed, though a tiny flicker of uncertainty finally crossed his arrogant features. I do not just believe it, he snarled, trying to regain the upper hand. I know it. I have the power to erase you from the business world with a single phone call. You are a nobody. I took a deliberate step toward him. The energy in the hallway shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. I was no longer the prey trapped in their corner. You want to blacklist me, Dad? I asked, my tone deadly calm and piercing. You want to use your prestigious investment fund to ruin my career. That is a fascinating threat. I tilted my head, holding his gaze without blinking, watching the false confidence slowly begin to crack behind his eyes. Because I am very curious, I continued, my voice echoing sharply against the sterile walls. Do you actually know who wrote the cybersecurity system that is currently protecting all the client data, the financial algorithms, and the trading secrets for your entire investment fund? Jonathan stood frozen in the cold service hallway. His mouth opened and closed as his brain desperately tried to process my question. The arrogance that had fueled his vicious threats just seconds ago suddenly hit a massive brick wall. He knew exactly what software his investment fund relied on to protect billions of dollars in client assets, but his bloated ego refused to make the connection to the daughter he had just called a worthless parasite. Before he could stammer out a response, the heavy wooden doors of the corridor swung open completely. Harrison Cole stepped through. The ambient noise of the live jazz band and the clinking silverware from the grand ballroom spilled into the narrow, sterile space. Harrison did not look at my parents. He did not even acknowledge Courtney and her indignant glare. He walked straight to my side, his presence alone shifting the entire center of gravity in the room. "We are done hiding in the shadows," Miss Gemma Harrison said, his voice smooth, but projecting an undeniable, terrifying authority. "You have a room full of people waiting to hear the truth, and I believe it is time we deliver it to them." Without waiting for permission or offering any explanation, Harrison gestured for me to follow him back into the glittering lights of the country club. My mother tried to reach out and grab my arm again, her face pale with sudden panic at the loss of control, but Harrison blocked her path with a single razor-sharp look. Catherine recoiled instantly, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned by a hot stove. I walked out of the hallway and stepped back into the lavish ballroom. The wealthy guests who had been eavesdropping quickly scrambled back to their seats, but all eyes remained locked on us. Jonathan and Catherine hurried out right behind us, their faces desperate and flushed, trying frantically to maintain the illusion of a perfect family celebration. Harrison did not stop at my isolated hidden table in the back of the room. He strode directly down the center aisle, marching past the wealthiest investors in Boston, past my aunts and uncles, who had openly mocked my career, and walked straight up the carpeted steps of the main stage. The jazz band faltered, the musicians lowering their brass instruments in utter confusion. The entire ballroom fell into a hushed, expectant silence. Jonathan rushed toward the base of the stage, his face turning an ugly shade of purple with renewed fury. "Get down from there immediately," my father hissed, trying to keep his voice low enough to avoid a massive public scandal. "This is a private family celebration. You have no right to interrupt my daughter's graduation party. Security will remove you both right now." Harrison ignored him completely. He reached out and took the microphone from the elegant brass stand. A sharp pitch of feedback whined through the massive speakers, making several guests wince and cover their ears. Harrison tapped the microphone twice, commanding the absolute undivided attention of every single person in the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his deep voice echoing powerfully off the vaulted ceilings. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to your luxurious festivities. My name is Harrison Cole. I am a senior managing partner at one of the top mergers and acquisitions law firms in the country, representing the largest technology conglomerates in Silicon Valley." A heavy murmur rippled through the elite crowd. Men in tailored tuxedos who had previously ignored my existence suddenly sat up straighter, instantly recognizing Harrison's prestigious name. In the cutthroat corporate world, Harrison Cole was an absolute titan. His sudden appearance at a Boston country club was a major event in itself. "I am here tonight on official business." Harrison continued, his piercing gaze sweeping over the sea of wealthy guests, before landing squarely on my parents, who were standing paralyzed at the base of the stage. "We are here to celebrate a truly monumental achievement. However, we are not here to celebrate a basic law school graduation or a newly purchased electric car. We are here to recognize one of the most brilliant minds in the modern cybersecurity industry." He turned and gestured toward me. I stood tall at the center of the stage. The dark red wine stain on my dress was no longer a mark of humiliation, but a visible badge of my survival against their endless cruelty. For the past 8 years, Harrison announced, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable clarity. "Miss Gemma has been quietly building an artificial intelligence software company from the ground up. She started this highly complex enterprise with zero outside funding, zero family connections, and zero financial support. She wrote the foundational code entirely by herself. She built the client list herself. And she secured massive security contracts with some of the most prominent financial institutions on the East Coast, including, ironically enough, the very investment fund owned by Mr. Jonathan. The collective gasp from the ballroom was loud and audible. Dozens of heads snapped around to stare directly at my father. Jonathan looked as though all the blood had been violently drained from his body. His jaw hung slack. The horrific realization was finally hitting his arrogant brain. The impenetrable security system keeping his entire financial empire afloat, the software he trusted with billions of dollars of sensitive client data, was created by the exact same daughter he had just tried to force onto her knees. "But that is not the reason I flew across the country to be here tonight," Harrison said, raising the stakes even higher and tightening his grip on the microphone. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, my firm finalized a historic acquisition. The Silicon Valley tech giant I represent has officially purchased Miss Gemma's cybersecurity company in its entirety. Harrison paused intentionally, letting the massive weight of his words settle over the stunned room. He looked directly at Catherine, who was clutching her pearl necklace so hard her knuckles had turned bright white. Then he looked at Courtney, whose smug, entitled expression had completely melted away into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Because Miss Gemma is the sole founder and retains 100% ownership of her company," Harrison stated, emphasizing every single syllable so no one could misunderstand. "The proceeds of this historic sale belong exclusively to her. The transaction has been legally cleared and the funds have been successfully wired into her private accounts. The total value of the cash acquisition is exactly $68 million. The words hung heavy and lethal in the air. $68 million in pure cash. The grand ballroom, packed with 200 of Boston's most elite and judgmental socialites, went completely terrifyingly silent. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. No one breathed. No one moved. The astronomical number shattered the reality of everyone in the room, making Courtney's $3 million mansion look like absolute pocket change. Courtney was standing near the front row of tables, staring up at me with wide, horrified eyes. Her fingers suddenly went limp. The crystal wine glass she had been gripping tightly slipped from her hand. It hit the polished marble floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces. The sound of the breaking glass echoed sharply through the dead silent room like a gunshot. My father stood completely paralyzed at the bottom of the stage steps. The vicious, contemptuous words he had used to threaten my career and destroy my life just moments ago evaporated into the cold air. His inflated ego, his country club prestige, and his pathetic illusion of absolute power were instantly obliterated by a $68 million reality check. The echo of Courtney dropping her crystal wine glass was the starting gun. The paralyzing shock that had frozen the grand ballroom instantly dissolved into a chaotic, buzzing frenzy. The wealthy investors, the judgmental socialites, and the hostile family members, who had spent the entire evening treating me like an invisible servant, suddenly looked at me as if I were made of solid gold. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the country club shifted so violently, it made my stomach turn. I watched the greed ignite in their eyes. It was a primal, disgusting transformation. Aunt Beatrice was the first to break the physical barrier. The very same woman who barely 20 minutes ago had mocked my clothes and called me a college dropout who fixed internet routers for minimum wage practically sprinted toward the edge of the stage. Her face was stretched into a wide, frantic smile that did not reach her calculating eyes. She shoved past a waiter desperate to get my attention. "Gemma, my absolute favorite niece." Beatrice called out, her voice dripping with a sickening, sugary sweetness. "I always told everyone you were the hidden genius of this family. We are just so incredibly proud of you. You know your uncle and I are expanding our real estate portfolio next month, and we are looking for a visionary private investor. A few $1 million would be pocket change for you now, but it would keep the wealth inside the family. We could double your money." I stared down at her, absolutely repulsed. Before I could even formulate a response to her breathtaking audacity, other relatives began swarming the base of the stage like sharks smelling blood in the water. Cousins who had not spoken to me in a decade were suddenly shouting their congratulations. Uncles who had laughed when my father kicked me out of the house were now desperately holding up their business cards, asking for 5 minutes of my time to pitch their failing startups. They were practically crawling over each other, reaching out their hands desperate to siphon off a fraction of my $68 million fortune. But none of their shameless begging could compare to the masterclass in manipulation that was about to unfold. Catherine realized that the narrative was slipping rapidly from her manicured fingertips. Her golden child Courtney was still paralyzed on the floor next to a puddle of spilled wine, completely overshadowed and forgotten. The $3 million mansion and the Tesla meant absolutely nothing in the shadow of my monumental acquisition. Catherine knew she had to act immediately to secure her access to my bank account. My mother marched up the carpeted steps of the stage, her high heels sinking heavily into the fabric. Her face underwent a miraculous, terrifying metamorphosis. The cold, ruthless sneer she had worn in the service hallway vanished entirely. In its place, she summoned a flood of theatrical, shining tears. She opened her arms wide and rushed toward me, playing the role of the overwhelmed, fiercely proud matriarch for the 200 guests watching her every move. My beautiful, brilliant girl, Catherine, cried out her voice, loud enough to ensure every single person in the ballroom heard her performance. My absolute genius of a daughter. She threw her arms around my shoulders, pressing her cheek against mine. She smelled of expensive perfume and cheap desperation. I stood completely rigid, my arms locked firmly at my sides, refusing to return her suffocating embrace. But Catherine did not care about my rigid posture. She was performing for the crowd. She pulled back just enough to look out at the audience, keeping one hand clamped tightly on my arm as if staking a physical claim on my wealth. "Do you see everyone?" Catherine announced, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "This is exactly what Jonathan and I always envisioned for her. People judged us. People said we were too harsh when we cut her off financially. They said we were cruel to refuse her student loans and force her out of our home. But we knew exactly what we were doing. We saw her raw, untapped potential. We knew that if we coddled her, she would never reach her true greatness." I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated nausea rise in my throat. I looked at Harrison Cole, who was watching my mother with a quiet, analytical disgust. He had seen countless corporate vultures, but even he seemed taken aback by the sheer audacity of her lies. "We gave her the greatest gift a parent can give." Catherine continued, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We gave her the gift of resilience. We applied the ultimate tough love because we knew she had the strength of a diamond inside her. We forged her in the fire. Every single moment of struggle she endured was a calculated parenting decision by Jonathan and me to ensure she would build this magnificent empire. We are the reason you are standing here today as a multimillionaire, Gemma. We pushed you to the top of the world." She turned back to me, her eyes wide and glittering with an insane, greedy light. She reached up, attempting to lovingly cup my cheek, acting as though the violent, hateful words she had spat at me in the service corridor had never existed. "We are just so overjoyed that you can finally share this massive success with the family that built you," Catherine whispered, dropping her voice so only I could hear the desperate entitlement lurking beneath her maternal tone. "We have so many plans for this money, sweetheart. We are going to do such incredible things together." I looked at the woman standing in front of me. I thought about the bitter, freezing nights I spent crying on a stained mattress, genuinely believing I was fundamentally unlovable because my own parents had discarded me like trash. I thought about the brutal panic attacks, the hunger and the sheer terror of navigating the world entirely alone, while they popped champagne bottles to celebrate Courtney. They did not forge me in fire. They simply threw me into the flames and walked away, hoping I would burn to ashes. And now that I had emerged carrying the gold they so desperately craved, they wanted to claim they had built the forge. I raised my hands and firmly grasped Catherine's wrists. Her skin was cold. I peeled her fingers off my arms with deliberate, undeniable force, physically removing her from my personal space. I pushed her hands away, letting them drop uselessly between us. Catherine stumbled back a half step, her fake smile faltering as genuine confusion crossed her face. The entire ballroom held its breath, sensing the violent shift in the atmosphere. I tilted my head, looking down at her with a calm, freezing smirk that mirrored the exact expression she used to wear when she humiliated me. I leaned in close, staring directly into her terrified eyes. How much does this act of maternal love cost, Mom? The collective gasp from the ballroom crowd was deafening. Catherine stood completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a way to spin my rejection. But before she could formulate another lie, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Jonathan. My father had recovered from his initial shock and quickly shifted into his signature mode of aggressive damage control. He knew that engaging in a public screaming match in front of Boston's elite would destroy his carefully curated image. He needed to isolate me. He needed to reassert his dominance behind closed doors. Gemma, you are clearly overwhelmed by all this sudden attention, Jonathan said, his voice projecting a fake booming paternal warmth that made my skin crawl. Let us step into the private lounge. We need to discuss your financial future like sensible adults. He did not wait for my consent. He gripped my arm tight enough to leave bruises and practically dragged me away from the stage. Harrison Cole took a step forward to intervene, his eyes narrowing dangerously, but I held up my hand to stop him. I gave Harrison a brief single nod. I needed to handle this. I needed to look the monster directly in the eye and watch him unravel. Jonathan shoved open the heavy oak doors of the country club's exclusive VIP suite and ushered me inside. The room was lavish, lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, leather armchairs, and a massive marble conference table. The heavy doors clicked shut behind us, instantly silencing the chaotic buzz of the ballroom. We were completely alone. The second the door locked, the fake loving father disappeared. Jonathan straightened his posture, shooting his cuffs and looking down his nose at me. He walked over to the private bar, poured himself a glass of scotch with shaking hands, and took a long drink before turning back to face me. Listen to me very carefully, Gemma, Jonathan commanded, slipping effortlessly into his boardroom negotiation voice. $68 million is a massive amount of capital. It is an incredibly dangerous amount of money for a young, unmarried woman to possess entirely on her own. You have no husband to manage your estate. You have no real experience in high-level wealth preservation. The moment the press gets a hold of this, you will become a massive target for fraudsters, gold diggers, and frivolous lawsuits. They will tear you apart and drain your accounts before you even realize what hit you. I stood silently near the center of the room. I let him speak, fascinated by the sheer audacity of his manipulation. But you are incredibly lucky. Jonathan continued, his tone turning smooth and oily. Because you have me. You have an experienced fund manager for a father. I am willing to overlook your disgraceful, disrespectful behavior out there. We are family, and family protects its own. Here is what we are going to do. First thing Monday morning, you will wire $50 million into my primary investment fund. In exchange, I will personally guarantee your financial security. I will even create a special director seat for you on my executive board. You will have a fancy title in office, and you will never have to worry about managing that stressful capital. We will build a true dynasty together. He smiled a predatory, sickening grin. He actually believed he had won. He believed I was still the terrified college dropout who would blindly hand over my entire life's work just to receive a crumb of his approval. I looked around the luxurious VIP room, then looked directly into his greedy eyes. A director's seat on your board, I asked quietly. Yes, Jonathan said, eagerly taking a step toward me. It is a highly prestigious position. It will legitimize you in the Boston financial sector. I tilted my head, letting a cold, humorless laugh escape my lips. Legitimize me. Dad, do you honestly think I spent the last 8 years building a top-tier artificial intelligence company without learning how to read a basic balance sheet? Do you think I am actually blind to what is happening inside your precious investment fund? Jonathan froze. The smug smile vanished from his face instantly. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with apprehension. I am talking about your catastrophic quarterly reports, I stated, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. I am talking about the fact that your flagship portfolio is currently bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. Your third quarter returns were negative 14%. You lost two of your biggest institutional investors last month because your risk management strategy is an absolute joke. You are over-leveraged on commercial real estate properties that are plummeting in value. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively stepped back, his back hitting the edge of the marble conference table. You do not want to protect me, Dad? I continued, stripping away every single layer of his pathetic facade. You are drowning in debt. You are facing a massive liquidity crisis, and you are terrified that the board is going to vote you out of your own company. You do not want to manage my wealth. You want a $50 million bailout to save your sinking ship. You want to use my hard-earned money to plug the holes in your failing empire. The color completely drained from Jonathan's face. His breathing became shallow and rapid. I had just dissected his closely guarded financial secrets with surgical precision. I had exposed the terrifying truth that he was entirely incompetent, a fraud hiding behind expensive suits and country club memberships. He was completely exposed, and he knew it. My answer is no, I said, delivering the final blow. I am not giving you $50 million. I am not giving you 50 cents. Your fund will collapse, your investors will flee, and I will not lift a single finger to save you. The sheer reality of my rejection broke something inside his brain. The panic in his eyes instantly morphed into violent, unhinged fury. Jonathan slammed his heavy crystal glass down onto the marble table with a deafening crash. The glass shattered, sending sharp fragments and amber liquid flying across the polished surface. His face turned a dangerous, apoplectic red. He lunged forward, his fists clenched tight at his sides, his chest heaving with uncontrollable rage. You arrogant, ungrateful little brat! Jonathan roared, his voice shaking the walls of the VIP room. You think you can just walk in here, disrespect me, and walk away with tens of millions of dollars that rightfully belong to this family? You built that software on a computer I paid for. You slept under my roof. You ate my food. You owe me everything. He slammed both hands flat against the table, leaning his massive frame toward me like a predator preparing to strike. If you refuse to transfer that money willingly, I will take it from you by force, Jonathan snarled, his eyes bulging with manic desperation. I will hire the most vicious legal team in this entire country. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years. I will drag you through the courts, freeze every single bank account you possess, and sue you into absolute oblivion. I will use the full extent of the law to punish you for your blatant disobedience. I will leave you begging for pennies on the street. You are going to learn what happens when you cross me. The heavy mahogany door of the VIP lounge pushed open before my father could finish his tirade. Courtney marched into the room with our mother trailing closely behind her like a desperate shadow. Courtney had completely dropped her earlier shock. She had replaced it with the smug and razor-sharp arrogance she had perfected during her 3 years at Harvard Law School. She stood tall and adjusted the lapels of her designer blazer, acting as though she were stepping into a federal courtroom instead of a private country club suite. She placed a reassuring hand on our father's shoulder, silently telling him to step back and let her take control. She looked at me with absolute contempt. She actually believed her freshly printed diploma gave her the power to bend reality to her will. You always were incredibly short-sighted, Gemma. Courtney began pacing slowly across the thick Persian rug. You think, because you signed a few acquisition papers today, that you are untouchable. But you forgot one very critical detail about corporate law. You forgot about intellectual property rights and the legal definition of seed capital. I watched her perform. She was putting on a show for our parents, proving she was the brilliant legal mind they had paid so much money to cultivate. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor surrounding the rug as she circled me like a predator. Let us take a little trip down memory lane, Courtney continued, her voice dripping with condescension. Let us go back to when you were 16 years old. You were obsessed with coding. You begged mom and dad for a computer so you could learn how to program. They went out and purchased a desktop machine for you. It was bought with family funds. You used that exact machine to learn how to write code. You used family resources to develop the foundational skills and the initial architecture for your little software projects. Catherine gasped dramatically, catching on to the malicious narrative her golden child was spinning. That is exactly right, my mother chimed in eagerly, her eyes lighting up with newfound hope. We provided the necessary equipment for your success. We invested in your technical education when you were just a teenager living under our roof. We funded the very beginning of your career. I stared at them, genuinely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of their delusion. Courtney was actually trying to argue that a refurbished desktop computer from 17 years ago somehow entitled them to a massive equity stake in a modern artificial intelligence enterprise. The software I sold today was built on encrypted cloud servers I paid for myself, using machine learning algorithms I developed years after they had violently kicked me out of their house. But the facts did not matter to Courtney. She was not trying to win a legitimate legal argument. She was trying to execute a ruthless shakedown. Under standard family property laws and intellectual property statutes, Courtney declared confidently any enterprise built utilizing initial family investments or family purchased equipment gives the original investors a legal claim to equity. Mom and dad are not just your parents. In the eyes of the law, they are the initial angel investors of your cybersecurity company. They hold an unspoken equity stake in everything you have built. Therefore, the proceeds from your $68 million sale do not belong exclusively to you. They belong to the family trust. Jonathan puffed out his chest again. His confidence returned instantly, bolstered by his golden child's aggressive legal fiction. He crossed his arms and glared at me, waiting for me to surrender under the weight of Courtney's Harvard-educated threats. He truly believed that this ridiculous legal gymnastics would terrify me into handing over my fortune. You really think a judge is going to entertain this absolute fantasy? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. You think you can claim ownership of an AI company because of a piece of plastic hardware from nearly 2 decades ago? Courtney stopped pacing and planted herself directly in front of me. She leaned in close, her eyes wide with greedy, malicious intent. She wanted to assert her dominance, to remind me that she was the educated elite, and I was just the college dropout who had gotten lucky. It does not matter what a judge ultimately decides, Courtney whispered fiercely. What matters is what I can do to your life right now. I know how the legal system works. I know exactly how to file an emergency injunction claiming stolen intellectual property and disputed family assets. I know exactly which legal levers to pull to plunge your entire acquisition into a bureaucratic nightmare. I can bury you in so much discovery paperwork that your new Silicon Valley bosses will deeply regret ever doing business with you. I can tie your money up in litigation for years until the legal fees bleed you entirely dry. She let that threat hang in the heavy air of the VIP lounge, eagerly watching my face for any sign of panic or submission. When she saw none, she decided to deliver her final ultimatum. She wanted to prove she was the ultimate negotiator, the brilliant savior of the family empire, who could force the rebellious daughter back into line. But I am a reasonable person, Courtney said, flashing a venomous and calculating smile. I am willing to offer you a very generous settlement to avoid dragging our family name through a messy, prolonged trial. We will let you keep the majority of your little windfall. All you have to do is compensate your initial investors for their contribution to your success. It is the only fair way to resolve this dispute without destroying your new corporate relationships. She took one last step forward, invading my personal space, her voice dropping to a harsh, demanding hiss. If you do not obediently hand over $20 million, I will file a motion with the court to freeze all your accounts tomorrow morning. I did not flinch. I did not negotiate. I simply looked at my sister, let out a soft, pitying laugh, and walked right out of the VIP lounge, leaving her $20 million ultimatum hanging in the stale air. I knew exactly what they were going to do next, and I was more than ready for it. Less than 48 hours later, a process server approached me outside my favorite coffee shop and handed me a thick stack of legal documents. Courtney had actually done it. She had officially filed a lawsuit in the Suffolk County Superior Court. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal fiction. It alleged breach of implied contract, misappropriation of family assets, and intellectual property theft. According to the brilliantly fabricated narrative my sister had submitted to a judge, my $68 million company was built entirely on the foundational code I had supposedly written on that ancient refurbished desktop computer they bought me in high school. They were officially claiming a 30% equity stake in my entire life's work. But Jonathan and Courtney did not stop at a mere civil lawsuit. My father knew that legal battles took time, so he launched a vicious synchronized attack on my reputation. By Wednesday morning, my face was plastered across 3 different Boston tabloids and several prominent local gossip blogs. Jonathan had used what was left of his country club connections and his rapidly dwindling cash reserves to buy a massive coordinated smear campaign against his own daughter. The headlines were designed to assassinate my character instantly. Ungrateful tech millionaire abandons loving family after stealing seed capital. The prodigal daughter who took the money and ran. The articles painted a heartbreaking picture of Jonathan and Catherine as devoted, loving parents who had sacrificed their own financial security to fund my early education and technical training. They included highly edited quotes from my mother tearfully explaining how she had stayed awake at night worrying about me only to be tossed aside the moment I struck gold. Courtney was portrayed as the loyal, brilliant younger sister fighting desperately to secure justice for her aging, heartbroken parents. The disruption to my life was immediate and severe. Paparazzi and freelance journalists began camping outside the lobby of my apartment building, shouting aggressive questions at me every time I stepped through the glass doors. My phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers. Even worse, the aggressive public relations nightmare began to bleed into my professional life. The Silicon Valley executives, who had just purchased my company, hated messy public scandals. My inbox filled with urgent, concerned emails from the acquiring board of directors. They wanted to know if there was any actual merit to the intellectual property claims. The smooth, triumphant transition phase of my $68 million acquisition was rapidly turning into a chaotic corporate headache. I sat in the pristine, glass-walled conference room of Harrison Cole's downtown law firm. The city of Boston sprawled out below us, completely oblivious to the war being waged inside these walls. Harrison paced back and forth across the thick carpet. He was holding a tablet displaying the latest tabloid article, his jaw clenched tight. As a man who orchestrated flawless, multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, he despised unpredictable family drama. "They are weaponizing the press to force you into a quick settlement," Harrison stated, tossing the tablet onto the polished mahogany table. "It is a classic dirty extortion tactic. Your father is utilizing his remaining media contacts to turn you into a corporate villain. They want to make you so toxic and cause so much friction with your new parent company that you will just hand over the $20 million to make the bad press disappear." I leaned back in my leather ergonomic chair and took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I watched the traffic moving along the streets far below. I felt no anxiety. I felt no urge to panic. "We need to release a counterstatement immediately," Harrison insisted, planting his hands firmly on the edge of the conference table. "We need to file a defamation suit and aggressively attack their narrative. If we let these articles circulate, unchallenged public opinion will solidify against you. The court of public opinion can sometimes influence a judge's preliminary rulings. Furthermore, the Silicon Valley executives are getting incredibly antsy. They bought a clean cybersecurity firm, not a featured spot in a Boston gossip column. If we do not shut this down by the end of the week, they might attempt to freeze a portion of your payout in an escrow account pending the resolution of your sister's frivolous lawsuit." Harrison waited for my authorization to unleash his team of corporate litigators. He was ready to go to war. He expected me to be furious to demand immediate retaliation against the people dragging my name through the mud. Instead, I set my glass down on the table. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked up at the fierce, high-powered attorney and shook my head. "We are not going to release a single statement, Harrison," I said, my voice completely relaxed. We are not going to file a defamation suit, and we are not going to ask the newspapers to retract anything. Harrison frowned, his sharp legal mind struggling to understand my passive strategy. Miss Gemma, if you remain silent, they will control the entire narrative. They will continue to escalate this until the damage to your reputation is irreversible. I stood up and smoothed out my blazer, feeling a deep, profound sense of control. Let them control the narrative, I replied smoothly. Let my father spend the last of his desperately needed cash on buying fake newspaper articles. Let my sister file every single fraudulent legal claim she can dream up. I want all of their lies officially recorded in the public domain. I want them to feel completely victorious and untouchable. Do not interrupt an enemy when they are making a fatal mistake, Harrison. Just let them keep digging their hole a little bit deeper. The air in the mediation room was thick with the smell of cheap institutional coffee and my mother's suffocating designer perfume. We sat across from each other at a long glass table. My mother, Catherine, wore a tasteful gray wool suit. Her face was an absolute masterpiece of carefully rehearsed suffering. She held a tissue in one hand and leaned toward the mediator, an older man named Henderson, who looked like he had witnessed entirely too many family wars. I just do not understand how everything ended up like this, Catherine whispered, her voice trembling with theatrical grief. We were a team. We gave Gemma every possible opportunity. When she wanted to learn about computers, we bought the equipment for her. We provided a roof over her head when she stumbled. We invested our hearts and our savings into her future. And yet the moment she finds success, she treats us like complete strangers. She treats us like enemies. I am a heartbroken mother, Mr. Henderson. I am not looking for money. I am looking for respect and the simple acknowledgement that our family's support is the only reason she is a millionaire today. I sat perfectly still and watched her perform. It was a flawless routine. If I did not know her true nature, I might have handed over my bank account and a hug right then and there. My father, Jonathan, sat next to her with his arms crossed, nodding solemnly. He looked like a man mourning a lost connection rather than a predator starving for a $68 million feast. Even Courtney managed to look grave, her Harvard law instincts telling her to let the emotional manipulation do the heavy lifting before she brought out the legal knives. Acknowledgement. I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a scalpel. That is a very specific word to use, Mom. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I did not slide it across the glass. I placed it firmly on the table and flipped it open. Inside were years of meticulously organized documents, a paper trail of a life they thought they had completely erased. Let us talk about that family support. I continued, looking directly at the mediator. My mother claims they provided a roof over my head, and that is absolutely true. But it was not an act of love. It was a strictly enforced business transaction. From the day I turned 18 until the night they threw me out into the freezing winter at 22, my parents charged me $600 in rent every single month for a windowless room in the basement right next to the noisy furnace. I pulled out the first set of bank statements. I had highlighted every single transfer in bright yellow marker. Here are the records. $600 a month, as reliable as a ticking clock. If I was even 1 hour late with the transfer, Jonathan would literally put a padlock on the kitchen pantry. I was not a daughter living at home. I was a desperate tenant paying down their mortgage while working 3 jobs just to survive and stay in school. Catherine's tissue stopped moving. Her eyes went wide, the fake tears drying up instantly. Jonathan shifted violently in his leather chair, his face turning an ugly ashen shade of gray. And then there is the computer, I said, pulling out the second set of documents. The famous seed capital, that refurbished $300 desktop machine they bought me when I was 16. Courtney just told the court that this specific machine entitles them to 30% of my entire company. Well, here's the handwritten receipt from my father dated 2 months after my 18th birthday. It clearly says payment for computer equipment. I paid them $500 to buy that machine back from them. But Jonathan did not stop there. He claimed I owed him retroactive interest for the time I used it as a minor. I ultimately paid them a total of $5,000 over 3 years for a $300 piece of junk that broke down 12 months later. I fanned the receipts out across the glass table like a winning hand of cards. The mediator leaned forward, picking up one of the rent statements. He checked the dates, then looked up at my parents. The professional sympathy in his eyes vanished entirely, replaced by the sharp, cynical glare of a man who suddenly realized he was sitting in a room with con artists. "Is this accurate, Mr. Vance?" the mediator asked, his voice dropping an octave. Jonathan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stared at the receipts, his brain frantically trying to remember if he had actually signed those papers. He had. He had been so utterly obsessed with extracting every penny from me back then that he never imagined those signatures would one day be used to defend a $68 million fortune. It was to teach her about responsibility. Catherine stammered, her voice losing its melodic sorrow and turning shrill. We did not want her growing up to be entitled. We were just trying to prepare her for the real world. What is a few $1,000s compared to the millions she has now? It is the principle of the matter. We are her very first investors. Investors expect a return on equity, Mom. I shot back, my tone as cold as ice. Tenants and debtors fulfill obligations. I fulfilled my obligations. I paid for my room. I paid for my equipment. I paid for my basic existence in your house with full interest. You did not give me a seed, you gave me a debt, and I paid it off a decade ago. The room went dead silent. The grieving mother narrative had been completely pulverized by the cold, hard reality of bank ledgers. Even the mediator looked visibly disgusted. For a brief moment, it seemed like the mediation was over. My parents were paralyzed, their faces pale, their grand arrogance totally shattered. They had marched in here demanding their fair share, only to be faced with public, undeniable proof that they were nothing more than predatory landlords to their own flesh and blood. But Courtney was not done. She sat in the corner, her eyes darting between the receipts and her phone. While my parents were drowning in the truth, she was aggressively hunting for a lifeline built out of legal technicalities. She slammed her hand down on the table, her Harvard class ring clinking sharply against the glass. "This changes absolutely nothing," Courtney snapped, her voice trembling with a desperate, ugly energy. "Rent receipts and hardware payments do not erase the legal concept of an implied trust. Gemma is a college dropout. She has no formal training. She developed the foundational algorithms for her artificial intelligence while living under our roof and utilizing the stability provided by the family unit. These payments were merely household contributions. They do not negate the fact that her intellectual property is a direct product of the Vance family ecosystem." She turned to the mediator, her eyes narrowing with predatory intent. "We will continue with the injunction. We will audit every single line of her code to see how much of it originated during those early years. If we have to drag this discovery process out for the next 3 years, we will do it. Gemma can sit on that $68 million, but she will not be able to touch a single dime of it while my experts tear her life apart. We have the resources to wait her out." "Does she?" The smug, vicious smirk returned to Courtney's face. She did not care about the truth. She did not care that our parents had just been exposed as frauds. She only cared about winning. She would use every loophole, every stalling tactic, and every expensive legal maneuver to drag this out until I broke. "Keep digging, Courtney," I said, standing up and gathering my folders. "You are doing a fantastic job showing everyone exactly what kind of people this family is made of." I walked out of the room, leaving Courtney's voice demanding another hearing echoing behind me. I knew what was coming. I knew they would get more desperate and more dangerous, but they still did not understand. You cannot break someone who was forged in the dark, and they were about to find out what happens when you try to steal from the person who designed the vault. I stepped out of the mediation center and inhaled the sharp Boston air. The sky was an iron gray, perfectly matching my mood. I had expected them to back down after being exposed as predatory landlords. I had expected the sheer weight of the bank ledgers to crush their ridiculous legal claims. But narcissists do not retreat when confronted with the truth. They simply double down on their delusions. My phone vibrated in my pocket before I even reached my car. It was Harrison Cole. His voice was tight, with a rare simmering frustration. In the high-stakes world of corporate law, Harrison did not like surprises, especially dirty ones. "Your father just played a very old, very corrupt card," Harrison said, skipping any pleasantries. Jonathan bypassed the standard court schedule. He called in a massive favor with a superior court judge he plays golf with every Sunday. They held an ex parte emergency hearing an hour ago while we were trapped in mediation. The judge granted a preliminary injunction. $20 million of your acquisition funds have been temporarily frozen in an escrow account, pending a full discovery process. I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I did not panic. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. "So he is using the last shreds of his country club influence to suffocate me financially," I replied. "He thinks locking up a third of my money will force me to the negotiating table." "It is a classic war of attrition," Harrison warned. "They intend to drag this out for years. They want to bleed you dry with legal fees and media harassment until you hand over the cash just to make the nightmare end." I ended the call and started the engine. My phone lit up again, this time with a social media notification. Courtney could not resist gloating. She had just posted a new photo on her public profile. The image showed her standing in front of the massive custom mahogany doors of a sprawling luxury estate. In her manicured hand, she dangled a shiny set of house keys. Her smile was sickeningly triumphant. The caption read, "Justice always prevails. Hard work pays off." So excited to finally move into my new $3 million estate. The universe always rewards the right people. A second later, a direct text message from Courtney popped up on my screen. "I hope you enjoy paying those massive legal bills, Gemma. We are going to drain you. The $20 million the judge just froze is going to look amazing when I use it to build my new infinity pool. You should have just surrendered on your knees at the country club when you had the chance." I stared at the glowing screen. She truly believed she had won. She believed that a temporary injunction was a permanent victory. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and merged into the city traffic. Halfway to my office, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed my father's name. Jonathan was calling to deliver his grand victorious ultimatum. I connected the call through the car's Bluetooth system. "Gemma, let us be reasonable adults about this," Jonathan began. His voice was dripping with a sickening faux paternal warmth. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch who was generously offering mercy to a defeated enemy. The judge agreed with our claim. "Your funds are officially locked. The media is absolutely tearing your reputation apart. Your new Silicon Valley bosses are undoubtedly furious about the negative press. You are losing this battle, and you are going to lose your entire company if you keep fighting me." I kept my eyes on the road. "Is there a point to this phone call, Dad? I can make all of this disappear today," Jonathan offered smoothly. "Transfer the $20 million to my investment fund voluntarily. Acknowledge that our family provided the seed capital for your business. If you do that, I will personally have the lawsuit dismissed. I will call off the journalists. I will even release a public statement saying we have reconciled. We can all move on and you can go back to your little computers. Refuse and I will keep your money frozen in court for the next decade." I let his threat hang in the silence of the car. He expected me to cave. He expected the terror of a frozen bank account to break my spirit. "You really think a temporary injunction is a victory, Dad?" I asked, my voice carrying a lethal quiet edge. "You think $20 million is enough to save you? Keep the lawsuit, keep the injunction, because by this time next week you are going to need every single cent of that money just to hire a defense attorney for your own bankruptcy hearings." I terminated the call before he could utter a single syllable in response. I drove straight to Harrison's downtown firm. The time for playing defense was over. It was time to completely dismantle my father's empire. When I walked into the conference room, Harrison had already pulled the financial disclosures Jonathan was legally forced to submit to the court to secure the injunction bond. Because Jonathan was deeply arrogant, he believed he could submit heavily redacted surface-level documents and no one would look twice. He thought he was dealing with standard family lawyers. He forgot he was dealing with a cybersecurity architect who tracked hidden financial data trails for a living. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room displays. I ran his firm's public financial filings, his tax records, and the redacted court documents through a forensic analysis algorithm I had written years ago to detect corporate espionage. I bypassed the superficial numbers and dug straight into the metadata and the hidden liabilities. Within 45 minutes, the horrifying truth about Jonathan's prestigious investment fund illuminated the massive screens. My father was not a wealthy man. He was a desperate drowning fraud operating a glorified Ponzi scheme running on absolute fumes. Look at these leverage ratios, I said, pointing at the glowing red numbers on the screen. Harrison leaned in, his sharp legal eyes narrowing as he read the data. Jonathan's primary fund has been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive years. To maintain his lavish country club lifestyle and to fund Courtney's expensive Harvard education, he has been moving money between client accounts illegally. But it gets much worse. I pulled up the property records for the $3 million mansion Courtney had just posted on social media. To buy this house for his golden child, he did not use liquid cash, I explained. Tracing the digital paper trail, he engaged in highly illegal mezzanine lending. He cross-collateralized this exact same luxury property with 3 different regional banks. He took out massive loans against an asset he did not actually own outright, using forged valuation documents to secure the credit. Harrison exhaled sharply. This is federal mortgage fraud. He is completely overleveraged. If the market dips even slightly, he will default on all 3 loans simultaneously. He is already defaulting, I corrected, bringing up the latest banking notices hidden deep in his corporate filings. He missed his last 2 massive balloon payments. The primary bank is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings by the end of the month. They are terrified of taking a loss on a toxic asset. They want to offload this bad debt quietly and quickly before the market finds out they loaned millions to a fraudster. I closed my laptop and looked at Harrison. A predatory silence filled the conference room. We are going to form a private asset management holding company right now, I instructed. Contact the primary lien holders immediately. I am going to use a fraction of my remaining liquid capital to buy my father's defaulted debt. Offer them 80 cents on the dollar for the immediate cash acquisition of the mortgage. They will be desperate to wipe it off their books. Harrison smiled, a dangerous, brilliant smile. If we buy the debt, we own the collateral. Exactly, I said. By Friday afternoon, Jonathan will not own that mansion. The bank will not own that mansion. I will own it. And I'm going to personally deliver the eviction notice. Friday evening arrived with a chilling breeze that swept off the harbor. I steered my car through the affluent winding roads of Wellesley until I reached the towering wrought iron gates of the estate. The $3 million mansion was completely illuminated, glowing like a beacon of stolen wealth against the dark sky. The circular driveway was jammed with expensive sports cars and luxury sedans. A team of hired valets in crisp white shirts rushed back and forth, opening doors for Boston's financial elite. Jonathan and Catherine were sparing absolutely no expense. They were throwing a lavish over-the-top victory party to celebrate their perceived triumph over me. They genuinely believed that freezing $20 million of my money meant they had won the war. I did not hand my keys to the valet. I bypassed the designated parking area entirely and drove straight up to the front entrance. I parked my car directly behind the shiny new Tesla my father had gifted Courtney, blocking it in completely. The valet rushed over, waving his hands and insisting I could not park there. I simply handed him a $20 bill, told him to take a break, and walked away. I climbed the sweeping stone steps leading to the main entrance. The heavy mahogany double doors were propped wide open to welcome the guests. Inside, the grand foyer echoed with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and arrogant laughter. A live string quartet was playing on the outdoor terrace. Caterers drifted through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and expensive hors d'oeuvres. It was a sickening display of financial delusion. My parents were literally burning through the last fumes of their stolen credit to project an image of absolute dominance. I stepped over the threshold. My heels clicked sharply and rhythmically against the imported Italian marble floor. I did not sneak in through the back. I did not hover near the edges of the room like I had at the country club. I walked directly into the center of the massive vaulted living room. The wealthy guests closest to the entrance noticed me first. The conversations in my immediate vicinity abruptly stopped. The silence began to ripple outward in waves, swallowing the loud chatter until the entire living room grew completely dead and quiet. Only the faint music from the terrace remained. Jonathan was standing near the custom stone fireplace. He was holding a glass of vintage bourbon, surrounded by a group of investors he was desperately trying to impress. When the room went quiet, he turned around. The arrogant, victorious smile on his face froze instantly. His eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated shock. Catherine was standing near the grand staircase draped in a new diamond necklace she had undoubtedly bought on credit just for this occasion. The color violently drained from her cheeks. She looked at me as if a ghost had just crashed her high society gala. They had fully expected me to be hiding in my apartment. They thought the malicious tabloid articles and the temporary court injunction would break my spirit. They thought I was currently crying over my frozen bank accounts, totally paralyzed by fear. They certainly did not expect me to crash their extravagant celebration wearing a sharply tailored suit with a heavy leather briefcase gripped firmly in my hand. Jonathan quickly handed his bourbon glass to a passing waiter. He puffed out his chest rapidly, shifting into his aggressive authoritarian persona to save face in front of his wealthy peers. He marched across the Persian rug, blocking my path to the center of the room. "What in the world do you think you are doing here?" Jonathan demanded. His voice was low but vibrating with intense, barely contained fury. "You were not invited to this house. You have absolutely no right to show your face here after what you did to us at the mediation hearing. I will give you exactly 10 seconds to turn around and walk out that door before I have security throw you off the property." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I looked at the panicked, desperate man standing in front of me and felt nothing but absolute pity. Before I could respond, Courtney pushed her way through the crowd of stunned guests. She marched right up to my father's side, practically radiating spoiled entitlement. She was wearing a designer cocktail dress, and in her hands she held a thick embossed document inside a leather portfolio. It was the deed transfer my father had signed over to her to celebrate her Harvard graduation. "Are you actually deaf?" Gemma Courtney shouted. Her voice echoed harshly off the high ceilings, shattering any remaining pretense of high society elegance. "Dad just told you to leave. You are completely delusional if you think you can just barge in here and ruin my celebration. You lost the court hearing. Your money is frozen. You have absolutely zero power anymore." Courtney stepped forward and shoved the leather portfolio aggressively toward my chest, tapping her manicured finger against the thick paper inside. "Do you see this document?" Courtney sneered, her face twisting with vicious, triumphant malice. "This is the official deed to this estate. Dad transferred the ownership entirely to me. This is my property now. I am the legal owner. So get the hell out of my house right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." The guests watched in stunned fascination. Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, pretending to be the distressed, victimized mother. Jonathan stood tall, letting his golden child deliver the final crushing blow he thought would send me running into the night. I looked at the piece of paper in Courtney's trembling hand. I looked at the fraudulent, worthless signature my father had placed at the bottom of it. Then I looked directly into my sister's eyes. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. I walked right past Jonathan. I ignored Courtney completely. I stepped up to the massive custom marble coffee table sitting in the very center of the living room. I placed my leather briefcase flat on the smooth stone surface. The crisp snap of the metal latches opening echoed loudly in the dead, silent room. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of certified bank documents, federal foreclosure notices, and a brand new, legally verified property deed. I dropped the entire stack onto the marble table with a heavy, deeply satisfying thud. "Your house?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silent room with lethal, absolute authority. "No. Open your eyes and look at those signatures, Courtney. This is my house." The sheer weight of my declaration seemed to suck the oxygen entirely out of the massive living room. My voice, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the vaulted ceiling, reached every single corner of the estate. The string quartet on the terrace had completely stopped playing. Even the clinking of glasses had ceased. 200 of Boston's most elite influential citizens stood frozen, staring back and forth between me and my father like spectators at a horrific high-stakes execution. Jonathan's face lost all color, shifting rapidly from his usual flushed, arrogant red to a sickly, terrifying pale. He looked at the stack of documents resting on the marble table, and I could see the exact moment his brain registered the official seals and the bank logos. He knew exactly what those papers were, and he knew he was completely trapped. "What kind of sick, twisted joke is this?" Catherine shrieked, breaking the oppressive silence. She rushed forward, positioning herself between me and Jonathan as if she could physically shield him from the truth. "You cannot just walk into our home and claim you own it. My husband bought this house. He is a respected investment fund manager." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The absolute certainty of my words was loud enough. "Respected investment fund manager," I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Mom, you really have no idea who you are married to, do you? You have been too busy wearing diamonds bought on credit to actually look at the balance sheets. Jonathan is not a titan of industry. He is a drowning, desperate fraud running a localized Ponzi scheme on absolute fumes." The collective gasp from the surrounding guests was undeniable. The word Ponzi was radioactive in this room. Several men in expensive suits immediately took a step back, physically distancing themselves from my father. Jonathan lunged forward, his fists clenched, but he stopped short when he saw the cold, analytical death stare I gave him. He knew I had the data. "You have been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive years, Dad," I stated, turning my attention directly to him. "You lost 2 of your biggest institutional investors last quarter because your risk management strategy is an absolute joke. To keep this ridiculous charade going, to fund Mom's shopping sprees, and pay for Courtney's wildly expensive Harvard tuition, you have been illegally shuffling money between client accounts. You have been stealing from new investors to pay off the old ones just to keep the lights on at your country club." "Lies," Jonathan bellowed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "These are all malicious, fabricated lies engineered by a vindictive, unstable daughter. Do not listen to a single word she says. She is angry because I froze her assets. This is just a pathetic retaliation." "Is it?" I asked, stepping closer to the marble table and tapping the thick stack of financial documents. "Let us talk about this $3 million mansion, Dad. Let us talk about the crown jewel of your fake empire. You told everyone here tonight that you bought this estate with cash. You told them it was a testament to your brilliant financial acumen." I picked up the first document from the stack. It was a heavily redacted, complex mezzanine lending agreement. I held it up so the guests in the front row could clearly see the prominent logo of a well-known regional bank. "You did not buy this house with cash," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the back of the room. "You engaged in highly illegal cross-collateralization. You secretly took out a massive mortgage on this property, but you did not stop there. Because you are so entirely desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth, you used forged valuation documents to secretly mortgage this exact same property to 3 different regional banks simultaneously. You sold the same house 3 times to generate enough liquid cash to throw this pathetic party." The whispers began. Low, urgent murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see the panic igniting in the eyes of several older men who I knew were heavily invested in my father's fund. The facade of the wealthy, invincible patriarch was disintegrating in real time. "You are completely over-leveraged." I continued, delivering the final fatal blow to his financial reputation. "You missed your last 2 massive balloon payments. You are not a billionaire. You are a criminal drowning in toxic debt, and the primary bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on this property last week. You do not own this mansion. The banks did." Jonathan staggered backward, bumping heavily into a velvet armchair. He gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to remain standing. His breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. The impenetrable armor of his ego had been completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, pathetic old man. Courtney stepped out from behind our mother, her Harvard law degree practically vibrating with indignation. She was completely oblivious to the reality unfolding before her. She waved the fake deed transfer in the air like a weapon. "That is entirely impossible!" Courtney shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. Dad just signed this deed over to me today. It is legally binding. You cannot just come in here and declare the house is yours because you printed out some fake banking documents. You have absolutely no legal standing here. I looked at my sister, feeling a profound mixture of pity and disgust. She was so blinded by her own entitlement that she could not recognize a burning building even while standing in the flames. I turned back to the crowd. The murmurs had escalated into frantic, hushed conversations. Several men were already pulling their phones from their tuxedo pockets, their faces pale with anxiety. The realization was hitting them hard. If Jonathan had committed federal mortgage fraud to buy his own house, their investments were undoubtedly compromised. The room erupted into quiet chaos. A wealthy investor near the terrace doors was aggressively whispering into his phone, ordering his personal attorney to initiate an immediate audit of his portfolio with Jonathan's firm. Another woman was desperately trying to log into her banking app. The lavish $3 million victory party had officially transformed into a panicked run on the bank. Courtney refused to back down. Her entire identity, her fabricated sense of superiority, and her desperate need for validation were all wrapped up in the embossed piece of paper she was clutching against her chest. She stepped directly in front of me, her designer heels sinking deeply into the expensive Persian rug. She thrust the document forward, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated denial. "You are lying!" Courtney screamed, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "You are just a jealous, pathetic college dropout trying to ruin my life. I am a Harvard lawyer. I know exactly how property transfers work. Dad signed this deed in front of a notary this very morning. It is fully executed. It is legally binding. This house belongs to me, and no amount of fake banking spreadsheets you printed off the internet is going to change that reality." Before I could even formulate a response to her frantic outburst, a tall, imposing figure stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. Harrison Cole moved with the sleek, predatory grace of a man who destroyed corporate empires for a living. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked calmly to the center of the room, standing right beside the marble table where my evidence lay scattered. "I highly suggest you request a full refund from Harvard Law School," Harrison said, his deep voice slicing effortlessly through the chaotic murmurs of the panicked guests. "Because you clearly skipped the entire semester on secured transactions and bankruptcy law." Courtney glared at him, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. "Who the hell are you?" "I am the attorney representing the actual owner of this estate," Harrison replied smoothly. He did not raise his voice, but the absolute authority in his tone commanded the attention of every single person remaining in the room. He picked up the fraudulent deed from the table, glanced at it with mild amusement, and then dropped it back down like a worthless piece of trash. "Let me give you a free legal lesson." Miss Vance Harrison continued, pacing slowly around the marble table like a shark circling its prey. "Your father could not legally transfer the deed to this property this morning because your father did not own this property this morning. You cannot gift an asset that you no longer possess." Courtney opened her mouth to argue, but Harrison cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "As Miss Gemma explicitly detailed just moments ago, your father took out multiple fraudulent loans against this estate," Harrison explained, addressing the stunned room as much as he was addressing my sister. "He missed 3 consecutive balloon payments. As a direct result of his gross financial negligence, the primary lender initiated a strict foreclosure process. As of last Tuesday at precisely 9 in the morning, the bank officially seized this asset. Your father was entirely stripped of his ownership rights days ago. That piece of paper you are holding is absolutely worthless. It is nothing more than a desperate forgery signed by a bankrupt man." Jonathan let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. He sank heavily into the velvet armchair behind him, burying his face in his trembling hands. The fight had completely drained out of his body. He knew Harrison was telling the exact horrifying truth, but the bank has to notify us. Courtney stammered, her arrogant facade finally cracking into tiny, irreparable pieces. "They have to serve eviction notices. They have to put the house up for public auction. You cannot just magically claim ownership. We have rights." "You would have rights if the bank had chosen to pursue a standard public auction." Harrison corrected, his smile turning dangerously sharp. But regional banks despise public scandals. They despise holding toxic assets tied to fraudulent investment funds. They wanted this bad debt wiped off their balance sheets immediately without drawing any media attention. So they opted for a private expedited sale of the distressed debt. Courtney looked around wildly. Her eyes darted between Harrison, the silent crowd, and her defeated father. So who bought it? Who bought the debt? Harrison stopped pacing. He turned and gestured respectfully toward me. I stepped forward, taking my rightful place at the head of the marble table. I looked directly into my sister's panicked, tear-filled eyes. The air in the room felt electric, charged with the brutal reality of the moment. I bought it. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute undeniable finality. The moment the words left my mouth, Catherine let out a piercing, hysterical sob. She grabbed the edge of the fireplace mantel to stop herself from collapsing onto the polished floor. The remaining investors in the room began rushing toward the exit, desperate to physically distance themselves from my father's radioactive fallout before the authorities arrived. Yesterday afternoon, I continued ensuring every single syllable struck them like a physical blow. I established a private asset management firm. I used a fraction of my cash acquisition funds to approach your father's primary lender. I offered them 80 cents on the dollar for the immediate purchase of his defaulted mortgage. They were absolutely thrilled to unload his toxic debt. They signed the transfer paperwork electronically last night. I picked up the thick, officially stamped document from the top of the pile and held it up high for my family to see. I am not just the person who exposed his massive fraud, I announced, staring down at Jonathan's trembling, pathetic form. I am the primary creditor. I bought the debt, which means I now own the collateral. I am the sole legal and rightful owner of this $3 million mansion. Courtney shook her head violently, dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks and ruining her flawless makeup. No, no, that is impossible. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. I ignored her pathetic plea and walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the circular driveway. I pointed a steady finger at the shiny new car parked right by the front steps, currently blocking the path of the fleeing guests. And let us talk about that brand new Tesla out there, I added, twisting the knife even deeper into their shattered reality. Did you really think Dad bought that with straight cash? He leased it under the investment fund's corporate account. The exact same corporate account that is cross-collateralized with the defaulted mortgage I just purchased. That means the car belongs to the estate's holding company. It belongs to me. I turned back to face the three people who had spent my entire life trying to destroy me. They were completely surrounded by the wreckage of their own arrogant delusions. The high society guests had either fled the mansion in terror or were standing in frozen, horrified silence against the walls. The elegant string quartet music from the terrace had been replaced by the echoing sound of my mother's gasping sobs and my father's heavy, defeated breathing. The checkmate was absolute. I had not just defeated them in a petty family argument. I had legally, financially, and publicly obliterated their entire existence. Every single thing they valued more than they valued me was now resting firmly in the palm of my hand. The last of the guests scrambled out the front doors, leaving behind a trail of abandoned champagne flutes and half-eaten hors d'oeuvres. The grand living room, which had been a stage for my family's supreme arrogance just minutes ago, now felt like a sprawling, empty tomb. The profound silence was broken only by the ragged, wheezing sounds coming from my father. Jonathan's face had turned a terrifying shade of gray. The false bravado that had fueled his entire existence had evaporated, leaving nothing but an empty, hollow shell of a man. He clutched tightly at the left side of his chest, his expensive suit jacket wrinkling under his desperate grip. He let out a choked gasp and sank heavily to the floor, his knees hitting the polished Italian marble with a dull thud. He squeezed his eyes shut, panting heavily, clearly hoping that a display of physical distress would somehow magically pause the execution of his empire. Harrison Cole stood entirely unfazed, watching my father with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an insect. I did not flinch. I did not rush to his side to offer comfort or call an ambulance. I knew that whether his chest pain was a genuine panic attack or a pathetic theatrical performance designed to elicit sympathy, it simply did not matter anymore. He was finally feeling the crushing, suffocating weight of the exact same despair he had forced me to swallow when he threw me out onto the street. Catherine saw that Jonathan's collapse was earning zero sympathy. Her survival instincts kicked in immediately. She realized that the billionaire husband she had worshipped was now entirely useless. Her $3 million estate was gone. Her social standing was pulverized. The only person in the room who held any actual power was the daughter she had spent 33 years actively trying to destroy. My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail. She threw herself onto the marble floor right at my feet. Her designer gown bunched up around her knees as she scrambled forward, reaching out to wrap her trembling hands around my ankles. I stepped back quickly, disgusted by her touch, forcing her to grasp at empty air. "Gemma, please," Catherine sobbed, looking up at me with mascara streaming down her face in dark, ugly rivers. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot just throw us out. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. Everything I did, even the harsh things I did, because I loved you. You have to believe me. We are blood. A daughter does not destroy her own mother. Please have some mercy in your heart." I looked down at the woman who had watched me beg for a simple student loan signature and laughed. I looked at the woman who had demanded I hand over my life savings just an hour ago so her golden child could open a law firm. "Mercy," I repeated, my voice as cold and hard as the marble beneath her knees. "You want to talk about mercy and a mother's love now? Where was your maternal love when you charged me rent to sleep in a freezing basement? Where was your mercy when you told me I was the scum of this family and that you wished you had left me at an orphanage? You do not love me, Mom. You love this house. You love your diamond necklaces. You love the illusion of superiority. And now that it is all gone, you are just terrified of having to live in the real world like the rest of us." Catherine buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, desperate sobs. She knew her words were entirely useless. The manipulation tactics that had worked for decades were completely broken. Courtney, however, had not accepted her defeat. The reality of her shattered future was driving her into a state of absolute, violent hysteria. She looked at the fake deed in her hand, then looked at the luxury car parked outside, realizing that her entire identity as the wealthy, elite Harvard graduate was a complete mirage. She had massive student loans, no seed capital, and her father was about to be investigated by the federal government for mortgage fraud. Her career was effectively over before it even started. "You ruined everything," Courtney shrieked, stomping her foot against the floor like a petulant, oversized toddler. She pointed a shaking finger at my face, her eyes wild with unfiltered rage. "You planned this whole thing just to humiliate me on my graduation night. You are a jealous, vindictive monster. Where am I supposed to go? I have a reputation to uphold. I cannot be homeless. I am a Harvard lawyer. You owe me that money. You owe me that car." I turned my gaze to my sister, completely unfazed by her screaming tantrum. "You are a Harvard lawyer who failed to do basic due diligence on a property transfer," I replied smoothly, cutting off her rant with absolute precision. "You have no reputation left, Courtney. By tomorrow morning, every law firm in Boston will know that your father is a fraudster and that you tried to extort $20 million from your own sister using a fake legal threat. You are not a victim. You are just a spoiled child who finally ran out of other people's money to spend." Courtney opened her mouth to scream again, but the sheer crushing reality of her situation finally choked the words in her throat. She dropped the fake deed onto the floor and covered her mouth, a look of pure, unadulterated horror washing over her face as she realized she had absolutely nothing left. I had heard enough. I had seen enough. The grand, lavish living room felt suffocating, polluted by their endless greed and their pathetic attempts to avoid the consequences of their own actions. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, opening the clock application, and set a timer for exactly 60 minutes. I held the phone up so they could all see the bright digital numbers beginning to count down. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Catherine's quiet, defeated whimpers. "I am giving you exactly 60 minutes to pack your clothes," I announced, my voice echoing with final, irreversible authority. You will pack only your personal clothing and your basic toiletries. Do not try to take any jewelry, any artwork, or any valuable assets, because I have already activated the new interior security cameras, and my private security team is waiting right outside those front doors. If you attempt to steal a single item from my property, I will have you arrested for theft before you even reach the front gate. I looked at Jonathan, who was still slumped on the floor, clutching his chest. I looked at Catherine kneeling in her ruined designer dress. And I looked at Courtney trembling and completely broken. Get up and pack, I commanded. And when the 60 minutes are up, you will walk out that front door and you will never return. Go find another table to sit at because this house does not harbor freeloaders. The heavy front doors of the mansion closed that night with a resounding, undeniable echo sealing my past outside in the freezing Boston air. I stood in the grand foyer and watched through the security monitors as their car pulled out of the driveway, the red taillights disappearing into the dark street. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I did not shed a tear for the family I had just evicted. I only felt the pure, unadulterated lightness of absolute freedom. 6 months have passed since that monumental night. Half a year has gone by since the carefully constructed fraudulent illusion of the Vance family empire was completely pulverized into dust. The universe has a remarkable, unyielding way of balancing the scales of justice and karma when it finally arrives, is incredibly thorough. It started with my father. The morning after the eviction, the regional banks formally declared his massive loans in default. But the real world-shattering devastation came 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my terrace drinking my morning coffee when the breaking news bulletin flashed across my tablet screen. Dozens of federal agents wearing tactical gear had raided Jonathan's downtown corporate offices. The news helicopters filmed them carrying out boxes of hard drives, physical ledger books, and entire server towers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had launched a massive full-scale probe into his localized Ponzi scheme and the rampant mortgage fraud he had committed for years. The arrogant, untouchable fund manager was paraded out of his glass high-rise in handcuffs. His expensive, custom-tailored suit looked absurdly out of place against the harsh, unforgiving reality of federal custody. He is currently awaiting trial in a maximum security federal detention center, facing up to 20 years in federal prison. The elite country club friends he had desperately tried to impress were the very first people to testify against him. They were eager to salvage their own reputations by throwing him entirely to the wolves. His empire is gone, and he will likely spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. My mother's descent was perhaps the most poetic and agonizing of all. Catherine had spent her entire adult life defining her worth by the carat size of her diamonds and the exclusivity of her zip code. Without my father's stolen money, and with all their remaining assets seized by the federal government to pay back defrauded investors, she was left with absolutely nothing. The woman who had proudly called me a failure at her elite country club is now employed there. But she is not sitting at the VIP tables sipping vintage champagne. Catherine works the closing shift as a member of the janitorial staff. I heard from a former mutual acquaintance that she spends her late evenings scrubbing the marble floors and cleaning the luxury restrooms used by the exact same wealthy socialites she used to gossip with. She wears a drab, oversized gray uniform. Her previously manicured hands are now raw and blistered from industrial bleach. She is forced to keep her head down and avert her eyes when her former friends walk past her in the hallways. The agonizing humiliation of fetching fresh towels for women who now view her with sheer pity is a daily, relentless punishment she can never escape. Then there is Courtney. My sister truly believed her Harvard law degree made her an invincible deity. She thought she could manipulate the justice system to steal my life's work. She forgot that the legal profession takes a very bleak, unforgiving view of attorneys who submit fabricated financial documents and fake property deeds to superior court judges. When Harrison Cole officially reported her actions to the State Bar Association, providing the undeniable proof of her extortion attempt, the disciplinary committee did not hesitate for a single second. Courtney was formally and permanently stripped of her license to practice law before she even had the chance to take on her first real client. Her prestigious, high-powered career was officially dead upon arrival. But the Ivy League student loans were still very much alive. Without the family trust fund, she tried to steal from me. Courtney was left drowning in over $200,000 of high-interest educational debt. Today, the brilliant legal mind of the family works the graveyard shift as a cashier at a 24-hour convenience store just outside the city limits. She spends her nights ringing up energy drinks and scanning lottery tickets under harsh fluorescent lights. She has to smile and apologize to rude, impatient customers while wearing a cheap polyester vest. Her Harvard class ring sits heavy on her finger, serving as a cruel, constant reminder of the golden future she completely destroyed with her own raging greed. I sit in the spacious, sunlit home office of my estate, the very same mansion they tried to rip from my hands. I open my laptop to review my company's latest global expansion metrics. The cybersecurity firm I built from nothing is thriving beyond my wildest expectations. In the corner of my screen, a small notification pops up from my email server. I open my blocked and filtered folder just out of passing curiosity. The screen fills with dozens of new messages from Jonathan, Catherine, and Courtney. The subject lines are all identical variations of desperate, pathetic begging. They plead for my forgiveness. They beg for a second chance to be a real family. They ask for tiny, immediate cash loans just to survive the week. I do not read a single paragraph. I do not feel a single drop of sympathy or hesitation. I lean back in my leather chair and look out the window at the beautiful, peaceful life I have built with my own two hands. I simply close the window and listen to the satisfying digital click as my custom security filter automatically routes every single message they send straight into the trash. Walking through the massive, silent halls of the $3 million estate during those first few weeks felt surreal. The architectural beauty was undeniable, but the towering walls still held the bitter, toxic echoes of my parents' suffocating arrogance. I had not purchased this property to live like a solitary queen in a castle built on mortgage fraud and deceit. I had acquired it to make an absolute, undeniable point, and now that the point was made, I needed to cleanse the space completely. I did not want to maintain a monument to their insatiable greed. I wanted to forge a fortress of genuine, unshakable empowerment. I called a team of elite commercial contractors and immediately set to work dismantling every single trace of Jonathan and Catherine's pretentious country club aesthetic. We tore out the ridiculous champagne bar, the imported crystal chandeliers, and the absurdly oversized dining table where they used to hold court and mock my existence. In their place, we brought in miles of heavy-duty fiber optic cables, high-performance enterprise servers, and rows of sleek, ergonomic workstations. I poured $5 million of my own liquid capital into a complete top-to-bottom structural renovation, turning a symbol of fake wealth into a powerhouse of actual creation. When the construction dust finally settled, the estate was no longer a tool for elite exclusion. I officially registered and rebranded the property as Tech Sanctuary. It is now a fully funded, comprehensive residential training campus dedicated entirely to young women who have survived severe psychological manipulation and financial abuse at the hands of their own toxic families. I remember exactly what it felt like to be thrown out into the freezing winter night with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes simply because I refused to surrender my dignity. I remember the sheer paralyzing terror of having my education held hostage by parents who weaponized their money to maintain absolute control over my life. I created Tech Sanctuary to ensure that other brilliant, capable women never have to experience that suffocating helplessness. We provide them with absolute, unconditional safety. They receive free, secure housing in the newly renovated private suites upstairs. Downstairs, in the exact same grand living room where I once stood and legally obliterated my father's fraudulent financial empire. These young women now learn advanced software engineering, artificial intelligence development, and elite cybersecurity protocols. We do not just teach them how to write complex code or defend digital networks. We teach them how to build impenetrable financial independence. We provide trauma-informed therapy, rigorous financial literacy workshops, and direct hiring pipelines to high-paying tech jobs in Silicon Valley. Every single time I watch one of our graduates secure a six-figure starting salary and sign the lease on her very first apartment completely independent of anyone else's control, I feel a profound, undeniable sense of victory. My parents spent their entire lives trying to convince me that I was a worthless failure who would never amount to anything without their conditional charity. They desperately tried to break me down to elevate their own fragile egos. But the women who walk through the heavy front doors of Tech Sanctuary are learning the exact opposite lesson. They are learning that their worth is not determined by the cruel, broken people who happen to share their bloodline. They are discovering that their past trauma is not their final destination, but rather the high-octane fuel that will launch them toward absolute greatness. We are taking the exact same pain that was meant to destroy us and using it to build a completely new reality. This morning, the Boston air is crisp and biting. I step out onto the expansive stone balcony of the master suite, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The sun is just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the manicured grounds and the towering city skyline in the distance. Below me, I can hear the faint, cheerful sounds of our new cohort of students walking across the courtyard, laughing freely, and discussing their morning coding assignments. There is absolutely no fear here. There is no walking on eggshells, no waiting for the next cruel insult, and no desperate begging for a crumb of familial affection. The heavy, suffocating chain that tied me to Jonathan, Catherine, and Courtney has been completely and permanently severed. I have legally and emotionally locked them out of my universe. I take a slow, deep breath, letting the clean morning air fill my lungs. I look out at the beautiful, thriving ecosystem I have built from the ashes of my family's ultimate betrayal. I did not just survive the fire they threw me into. I inhaled the flames, walked out of the inferno without a single burn, and built a completely new world. I finally understand that true wealth has absolutely nothing to do with the luxury car you drive, the designer labels you wear to a country club, or the fake image you project to society. True wealth is the absolute, untouchable freedom to wake up every single day and know that you belong entirely to yourself. Sometimes being called the dumb one is the absolute perfect cover you need to quietly build your own empire in the dark. Have you ever been wildly underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect and love you? Did you use their doubt and cruelty as the ultimate motivation to prove them entirely wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about claiming your power, setting unbreakable boundaries, and walking away from toxicity. Remember, your ultimate success and your undeniable happiness will always be the only revenge you ever need.